Hi, I'm Porter Fitch, and I'm going to be talking to you about the end of the universe. And I don't just mean the end of life on Earth, or even the end of the Earth, but the end of everything that exists. And I'm not really going to be talking about that in a scientific way. I'm not a scientist. And scientists have to look at things in a pretty, concrete way. And I'm going to be sort of taking some liberties with this, looking at the end of the world in a metaphorical sense rather than just figuring out what's happening. I'm not making an argument for which possibility of the ending of the world is the most likely. So, in order to talk about the end of the universe, you have to understand a couple of forces that are acting on it. One of these is redshift. Redshift is the idea that everything is moving away from everything else. The universe is expanding, and things are getting further apart. So this was first discovered by a guy named Edwin Hubble, the guy who invented the Hubble Space Telescope, and he figured out by bouncing light off, or watching light bouncing off the edge of the universe, that the universe is, getting farther apart. And not only is it getting farther apart, it's getting farther apart faster. Redshift is speeding up. So everything's moving away from everything else faster than it was yesterday. Which is sort of depressing if you think about it. But moving on, I'm also talking about gravity. Gravity is very simply the idea that two things move together if they have mass. Mass is just, the property of being a thing, a rock, a person. And yeah, any two things are drawn together. Like even if you have like two pebbles on the table in front of you, they are ever so slightly drawn towards one another. And given billions and billions of years, they would reach each other. So the third force I'm talking about is entropy. Entropy is the idea that whenever a chemical reaction takes place, or whenever something changes in the universe, a star is formed, say, there's not as much energy left over as there was when the whole thing started. In the fact of things being disorganized, that's described as entropy, chaos. And one of the most important rules in science says that chaos, entropy, can only increase. Now, as for possible endings of the universe. So for some reason, all of these endings have the word big in front of their name. We know the Big Bang, that's not the ending, that's the beginning, and we're pretty sure that that's correct, that we're correct, and that the Big Bang is how the universe started. Everything was super, super, super dense. It's called a singularity, and it was so dense that it all blasted apart and became the universe. And so that's what causes redshift. Things are moving apart. And what's going to happen next, I guess cosmologically, is that, well, one of the following. Either one, the Big Freeze. As the universe expands and energy is lost through entropy, everything slows down. Things get further apart, temperatures get lower, things break down, and eventually there's nothing left. Everything is infinitely fine dust at an equal density. Basically, the universe is just a giant dust bunny. Either that happens, or two, the Big Rip. This is when the acceleration of redshift tears everything apart. Everything keeps getting further and further and further apart until everything is literally infinitely far apart and still hurtling away from everything else very, very quickly. Third possibility is the Big Crunch. Basically, the universe is going outwards and outwards and outwards, and then after it reaches a certain point, its acceleration is not great enough and its mass is great enough that everything gets sucked back together. Probably into a black hole singularity, which is something similar to what was around when the universe was created, the singularity out of which the Big Bang arose. And the fourth possibility is described as the cyclical model, formerly the Big Bounce, but the specifics of that theory were sort of incorrect. So, cyclical model. And this is the idea that the universe is super compact at the beginning, moves out, eventually is drawn together, like in the Big Crunch, but the force of it being pushed together causes it to sort of squish in and bounce back out, and keep doing that forever. Okay, so I'm going to be talking now about the significance of each of these, the metaphorical implications of the end of the world I was talking about. Kind of what I'm trying to do here is take the end of the universe, the event, and interpret it as one would a piece of literature. You know, you take the ending of a play and you can tell whether it's a comedy or a tragedy. You take the ending of a book, yeah, you can say this was a sad book, this book resolved in a definite way, this book didn't. So people often refer to, or people often divide works of art, or works of literature, stories, I guess. Yeah, we'll use that word, stories. People often define stories as either a comedy or a tragedy. Either things move apart or things come together. And it's pretty easy to see a parallel between that and the difference between the Big Freeze and the Big Rip, or the Big Crunch. The Big Crunch and the Big Freeze, or the Big Rip. The Big Freeze and the Big Rip, they sort of seem like tragedies, you know? Everything is moving away from everything else and then stops. This might be, for example, character is growing more and more distant from his mother and never manages to resolve it. That might be, say, the Big Freeze. Alternately, the Big Rip might be where everything is blasting away from everything else, and like Hamlet, for example. Everyone is more and more suspicious of everyone else, and then everyone hates everyone else more and more, and then everybody kills everybody, and that's the end. Alternately, we can think of the Big Crunch as a comedy. Everything comes together. At the end of the universe, everything is the same thing. All things are united. Which I find actually pretty inspiring to think about. You know, if everything ends with everything being collapsed, everything being the same thing, seems like a nice way for it to have ended to me. That said, I think it is possible to interpret the Big Freeze or the Big Rip as positive as well. In the Big Freeze and the Big Rip, at the end of the universe, everything is evenly spaced. So, rather than everything being one thing, everything is infinitely many things contained in one thing, our universe. Think of the universe as sort of a big four-spatial dimensional bag. So, even though everything's far apart, it's sort of like it became a bag of rice rather than, say, a bag of fighting rodents that are humans and chaotic interactions. Anyways, what I find most interesting, though, is looking at the Big Bounce. The Big Bounce, remember, is the idea that the universe collapses in and then bounces out and collapses in and bounces out. You know, our universe, our story, if you will, might not even be the first story that's been told. There might have been universes before ours. They might have had something close to humans in them. And I just like this idea that our story is not alone in stories, that we're a book on the shelf of a library. And I'm going to touch with that on the multiverse model. This is getting into ridiculously complicated physics that I don't pretend to understand, and I think my video is ridiculously long as it is. But the multiverse model is the idea that our universe is not the only universe. So I said picture our universe as sort of like a big bag. Maybe there are a bunch of bags floating in a big old sludgy pond or something. And a lot of these ideas rotate around the idea that when one universe ends, it actually subdivides into two different universes. So rather than our universe simply dying, it gives birth, and it was given birth to. And that lends a sort of nice continuity that I like. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. Anyways, leaving you with these cheery thoughts about a cheery topic. I'm Porter. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.